Welcome to Rico 12. I'm Justin, your host and a beautifully imperfect, stumbling, bumbling child of an absolutely powerful and perfectly loving God and an addict. Rico 12 is all about exploring the common threads of addiction and sharing tools and hope from those on a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and places to learn and support one another. Our speakers represent various fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, thus showing the common threads of recovery no matter our addiction or affliction. Today's speakers for the 285th meeting are Matt and Carriss D. Matt has spoken with us previously on meeting number 183, but together they are a first-time team speakers, and I'm really excited about this. Their chosen title for their talk today is Emotional Sobriety and Restoring Intimacy, and I look forward to hearing their messages here in just a few minutes. First, for a little bit of business. Rico 12 has several recovery resources in our family of podcasts and social media communities. To learn more, listen more, or connect more, you can check them out. Check out the other podcasts, and you can find that at www.rico12.com. That's RECO12.com. And to join in our social communities, you can check out the chat and the show notes of the podcast if you're listening to the recording. Rico 12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue our mission. Specific shout-outs go out this week to Ferdinand, Daniela, Jackie, and Abigail for their generous donations. Thanks to all of our spearheads, past, present, and future. Your donations really help in this project. If you also feel the desire to become a spearhead and support this cause, go ahead and visit rico12.com/support or click on the links that I'll have in the chat here or in the show notes of the podcast for either one-time or monthly donation options. Your support, not just financially, but with your word of mouth, makes a huge difference in keeping us able to share these messages of recovery worldwide. We look forward each meeting to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'm excited to introduce our guest speakers for today, Matt and Carriss D, and give a little background on each of them. So here's a little bit about Matt. Although sexaholism was pervasive in Matt's family of origin, he didn't know there was a name for it until his wife's own sexaholism brought him to S-Anon in 2021. It wasn't until he was about 9 months in that he finally realized he had work to do on himself, and by the end of his first year in recovery, he'd completed his step work and had become a new person. It used to be that he couldn't imagine life being any worse, but now, by the grace of God, he struggles to imagine it can get any better. Now here's a little bit about Carriss. Carriss is a grateful, recovered sexaholic from St. Louis and has been a member of SA since August of 2021. Carriss joined the program to save her marriage, but when she accepted her sexaholism as a disease and began working a rigorous program, she saved herself. Carriss's life, marriage, and attitude have been changed for the better, and for these reasons, she is grateful to be a sexaholic. Take it away, Matt and Carriss. The floor is yours.
First of all, Justin, thanks for having us on the podcast, and to everybody listening, thanks for joining us. I'm Matt D. from St. Louis, a grateful member of S-Anon since December 4th, 2021. It is good for me to be here today.
And I'm Carriss D. from St. Louis, a grateful recovered sexaholic. My sobriety date is November 25th, 2021, and it's good for me to be here today as well.
Y'all, we're going to start at the beginning. And for me, what that looked like is my parents dealt with their emotions by repressing them altogether, ideally, or if that didn't work, doing their level best to dull them with drugs and alcohol, except for anger, which was not repressed, nor was it dulled. It was processed and intensified through drugs and alcohol and expressed openly through rage, as well as physical, emotional, and mental violence. Sex and substance addiction, coupled with emotional instability, this was the model for living handed down to me by my family, which I took with me into adulthood and used as my measuring stick for what love and relationships should look like. Sex addiction specifically was so prevalent that it became normalized and became little more than a fact of life for my family. My father molested my sisters, my uncles molested their sons and my brothers. My nieces and nephews were molesting one another. My sister's boyfriend was molesting my sister's daughters and one of my sisters. My brother molested my sisters. Two of my sisters molested me. One of those sisters engaged in consensual incest with two of my cousins. The other molested myself and two of my brothers at the same time. This behavior, while not exactly a secret within my family, was not spoken of openly. It was occasionally denied having occurred, but more frequently it was altogether ignored. All this sexual insanity in my family was so frequent, it was so commonplace, that I actually became desensitized to it and therefore apathetic to it all. I used to think that my lack of emotional response to the sexaholism in my family of origin was evidence that it hadn't profoundly affected me. And I now know that that same lack of emotional response is actually proof that I was profoundly detrimentally affected by it. So my family of origin certainly qualifies me. And I didn't realize this until S-Anon, but every woman I have known sexually has cheated on me with multiple partners. But the one that got me off the bench and into the game was my wife, Carriss, who was my primary qualifier and the reason I entered recovery.
So a little bit about my story. My parents were divorced when I was 4, and my mom had a live-in boyfriend when I was 6. He disciplined with yelling, screaming, throwing stuff, physical abuse. There was an incident that was so bad it ended with him and 2 of my older sisters in the hospital. He also sexually abused me between the ages of 6 and 14. And when my older sister found out about it, she immediately called the police, and he was arrested. But shortly after this, my mom coerced me into writing a letter that would recant my story and that she also had notarized. My older sister stepped in and ultimately saved me from the situation, taking me out of the home until we were sure that he was gone and it was safe, and she handled matters with the police. So since sex was introduced to me at such a young age, it was no surprise that I started having sexual relationships at the age of 14. I jumped from relationship to relationship in my teens and 20s and was very promiscuous. I was also unfaithful in many of those relationships. And when Matt proposed to me, I thought, this is it. This is the relationship that will help me change my ways. I thought once I was married, I'd no longer have the desire to look outside my relationship for emotional or sexual connections. But I was wrong, and within 6 months of our marriage, I had gone astray. My sexual acting out continued and progressed during our marriage for the better part of 15 years, with some intermittent sobriety. I was living a lie, and I wanted to stop, but I couldn't, not for more than a few months at a time, sometimes a few years, but I also didn't know I had an addiction. I joined program in August of 2021, and I'd like to say I took to it immediately and worked a serious program, but I didn't, because I didn't feel that I really needed to be in program. I didn't feel that I was a sex addict. When I had joined, I hadn't acted out in 6 months, so I didn't think I actually had a problem. A few months later, I did act out again, and that's when it hit me that I had a real problem and I needed a real solution. Before I got sober, I had the wrong solution to my problems, and now I have a healthy solution. So now that you know a little bit about each of our stories, we'd like to share how we've turned those deficiencies into strengths by using them as tools to rebuild and strengthen ourselves and our coupleship.
Shortly after D-Day, which was about 9 months before I would be introduced to S-Anon, I somehow had what amounts to a pretty profound insight for a non-recovering abusive rage monster. My marriage was defective, and as such, it was not something that I was interested in fixing. And even if it could be fixed, it would just break again. But that's where the insight ended, and that's where my untreated Anonic thinking began. I didn't want to fix my broken marriage, but I was pretty sure I could build a new marriage if only I could fix my broken wife. I didn't have a great picture what a new marriage would look like, but the wife that I imagined would be honest, loyal, forthcoming, repentant, humble, submissive, apologetic, and coachable. She would follow to a T, this is not a joke, guys, she would follow to a T the 20 or so page plan that I had developed, which corrected her problems first and our problems second. And I'm not joking when I say there was no plan for correcting my problems. I legitimately did not realize that I was part of the problem. It didn't occur to me that a new marriage with a new wife, or at least a refurbished wife, wouldn't work with the same old me. But it doesn't make sense to tear down your old condemned house and use the rotten lumber to build a new one. I didn't know it at the time, but it wasn't exactly quality building material. Thankfully, we did find program, and through that, I learned some bloody humility. Seriously, it's laughable. I couldn't even recognize that building a new coupleship would require both a new Carriss and a new mat. But by working my own program and allowing her to work hers without any unsolicited input from me, we began to heal individually. And only then were we qualified enough to begin working on our coupleship.
So as Matt said, we both found program and worked on ourselves, but soon after we decided to start working on our coupleship. So we'll discuss some of the tools we have and still use in the ongoing construction of our new coupleship, beginning with two sides of the same coin, intimacy and vulnerability. So in recovery, we've not been working on restoring intimacy to our marriage, but creating it. Since there wasn't really anything to restore, we basically started from scratch. And intimacy is about building that closeness in personal relationships by opening up about details in your life and bonding over common interests. Intimacy can be experienced in multiple ways, including physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual connection. And to me, intimacy means being able to share a whole range of thoughts, feelings, and experiences with someone safely without fear of being judged or embarrassed. And in our marriage, when I was living with addiction, there was no intimacy. Instead, there was isolation, which actually prevents intimacy. We didn't really communicate with each other or spend time alone with one another, nor did we share ourselves and our thoughts with each other. Partly because I was too busy keeping secrets, and partially because I did not feel I had a safe space to share who I was.
And she also could not be intimate with me because what emotionally closed off, invulnerable woman would attempt honesty and amends about her behavior in an environment where every syllable that escaped her mouth was met with rage and verbal violence? I tried to make her afraid to keep silent, but instead I made her afraid to speak up.
And before we began creating different levels of intimacy in our marriage, I was very isolated. And intimacy doesn't just happen. You have to work at it. Intimacy is choosing to be connected rather than isolated. For people like Matt and I, who had no model of intimacy growing up, our understanding of it was incomplete prior to recovery. And even now, having been in recovery going on 3 years, we still don't have a complete picture of it. But it's built up over time as you connect with someone and requires both people to do the work. For me and our marriage, that's meant being more vulnerable with Matt. So I now make it a point to share with him what I need, what I'm thinking, and how I'm feeling. And it was a little scary at first when I first started opening up and sharing myself more, but he has created a safe space for me to share, which I didn't have before. And now that I have that safe space, I can comfortably be my whole self with him, which means vulnerability, that willingness to take a risk to show emotions and provide honest expression despite fears. Scary to be vulnerable, but if I cannot be honest in my marriage, then where will I be myself? And I'm also learning to be vulnerable with my friends, especially friends in program. I've started sharing more of myself with them as a way to build those friendships. And when I check in with my sponsor, she encourages me to share something I don't want to share. This was very daunting at first because it means putting myself out there completely, and I was terrified of that. But as I started sharing more of my raw feelings, thoughts, and emotions, it got easier. I found myself looking forward to our check-ins, and I also realized at some point I no longer had much that I didn't want to share. Being vulnerable with her had become comfortable and easy. Being my authentic self has changed me, and our respective programs have truly changed our lives. Our marriage is growing and thriving and is better than it ever was. And I thought working this program might help our relationship, but I never imagined it would make it this good.
You know, even after all the time that we've spent learning what it looks like, how to model it, and with all the progress that we've made, it's still really hard work. It takes a lot of practice. And for me, it's often weird and awkward and scary. And here's a recent example. What was it? August, July. I was at the S-Anon International Convention in LA a few months ago, chatting with some program people at the hotel lobby's entrance. I'm watching for my friends to arrive, and I was lost in conversation for a minute, and then when I looked up, I saw this woman walking into the lobby, and at first glance, it looked like Carriss. Now, I wasn't expecting her to arrive until the following morning, so I was very surprised and excited to see her. But it only took a second for me to realize that it wasn't her. Suddenly, I was as disappointed as I had been excited and a little sad on top of it. And I thought, you know, Carriss would probably really appreciate hearing that story. I should call and tell her. But I didn't do it because it suddenly seemed an intensely intimate, vulnerable thing to do. Not the story itself, the story is just a story, but the act of sharing it was really exposing myself in a raw, purely emotional state. And I was scared, so I didn't share the story. Later at lunch, I told that story, however, to a couple of my brothers in the program, admitting them that I had felt too vulnerable, too scared to share the story with Carriss. And as I was saying it, I didn't realize that it didn't feel like an intimate action when I shared it with my recovery brothers. And then I asked them if it was weird that I could share with them and not her. And I didn't bother waiting for a reply because, I instead answered my own question. Yes, that's weird. I should call and tell her. And so I did, but it was still scary. It was still very vulnerable. And here's what I make up about that. Carriss and I, prior to recovery, had no real experience being emotionally intimate with one another. It had never been modeled for us by our families or our friends. We didn't know what it looked like. And then I entered recovery and teamed up with a sponsor who relentlessly harassed me to feel and to share my feelings. And eventually I came to accept that if I'm actually going to recover, I will have to be vulnerable with the men in the program and with my sponsor, which was awkward AF at first, but with practice, it became not that big a deal. It was with the men in S-Anon that I first learned how to be vulnerable through lots of this uncomfortable practice. Learning to be vulnerable and emotionally intimate takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. And Carriss and I have simply not had that much practice with one another at that level. Not to mention the fact that I don't have the traumatic emotional history with my S-Anon brothers that Carriss and I had. And whereas there is still fear associated with intimacy in our marriage, it's the trauma itself that bonded me to the men in the program.
Thanks, Matt. So we're going to transition a little bit and talk about some tools and healthy communication. Communication is hard, and thinking before you speak is important, but it's also important to focus on how you're feeling. And that is where HALTs come in. So HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and stressed. And if I'm feeling any of those things, I know I'm not in a good place for a healthy conversation. And I even have to consider HALTs when it comes to my sexual sobriety. Any of these items can endanger my day if I'm unaware of how I'm feeling. HALTs always wins.
Okay, so let's talk about think, T-H-I-N-K. Before recovery, there wasn't much that I said that was honest for its own sake, or free from secret motives or hidden agendas. If I did speak the truth, it was because it was what I had determined was necessary at the time to manipulate a person or a situation to get what I wanted, how I wanted it. And often I weaponized it. I used it to hurt, destroy, shame, usually in an effort to gain or maintain some measure of control over someone or something. I often used an approach where the means justified the end, justified the means. In other words, using the truth destructively in order to uncover the truth. And this was my MO when I interrogated my wife for hours on end, when I violently assaulted her with my words after having discovered some new bit of unsavory information during said interrogations. My sponsor taught me pretty early on that if I have something to say that is of a sensitive nature, I need to first strain out all the verbal vomit by assessing my motives. And I do this by testing for 5 imperatives. I have to think before I speak. Is what I say true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind? Not true, helpful, inspiring, necessary, or kind. My comments don't qualify as a good idea simply by meeting one of those criteria. I have to check all 5 of those boxes. Just because what I have to say is true doesn't mean it's helpful, inspiring, necessary, or kind.
Yeah, and that helps in communication, which is hard. Honest, appropriate, respectful, and direct. It's hard. So for me, that means say what you mean and mean what you say and think before doing so. And I believe you have to think about how to use communication to make your partner feel needed, desired, and appreciated. Communication is verbal and nonverbal, so actions can speak volumes. And it's not always what is said, but how it's said that is important. A few months ago, Matt and I were talking about something, and the conversation quickly began to frustrate me because I didn't feel like he was listening to me, which is a really big part of healthy communication. Anyway, I soon realized that he also felt that I wasn't listening to him. So we were both having difficulty understanding one another. And Matt suggested that we just reset the conversation. So that's what we did. We took a moment to pause. We started over. I explained my point. He explained his. And once we understood where the other person was coming from, everything was resolved. We listened to each other and we were able to move forward. And we now do this anytime we have trouble communicating. We reset, we reevaluate, and we listen to each other without interruption. And this has really worked for us and has greatly strengthened our communication and our relationship. I was telling Matt just the other day how I now feel heard and appreciated because of his efforts.
And I'd like to throw this in there as well. Communication, when healthy communication is not necessarily agreeing with the other one. I can be wrong today, even when I'm right. You get what I'm saying there? We are quite different now than when we entered recovery. And since I'm an S-Anon, we're going to necessarily have to have a little chat about emotional sobriety, which is what we seek in a S-Anon. And that was a very peculiar, mysterious concept to me early in recovery, an intangible that I couldn't for the life of me understand. Early on, it was an undeveloped understanding of it. I used to think that it meant eliminating certain, quote, negative emotions, which I believed at the time to be character defects of mine. Sorry, someone was calling in there. So I believe this to be character defects of mine, these, quote, negative emotions. I thought it meant, in a best case scenario, to be completely free from feelings of anger, fear, frustration, annoyance, rejection, loneliness, sadness, disappointment, shame, etc. If they couldn't be done away with altogether, then some measure of control or suppression of them was the next best thing. Then my understanding of emotional sobriety developed into something somewhat more refined when I came to realize that there is no such thing as a bad or a negative emotion. Good and bad, right and wrong, these are moral considerations of behavior. And since experiencing an emotion is not a decision we make, it's not an action that we take, it's therefore not a behavior. This excludes feelings from moral consideration. Our emotions and our capacity to feel them are God-given, and therefore not bad. They are part of His design. Now, many of them can be certainly characterized as unpleasant or challenging, but none of them are bad or negative. One of the first things I learned in program was that I should feel my feelings because feeling is healing. Feeling and expressing the full range of my emotions, rather than ignoring or suppressing them, is healthy and necessary for recovery, and therefore a good thing. And so since I'm not supposed to suppress or eliminate these emotions, how then am I supposed to obtain and maintain emotional sobriety with regard to these emotions? In our S-Anon Green Book, I discovered a chapter entitled Defining Our Emotional Sobriety. And this honestly frustrated me after I read the chapter because although it gives great examples of what it looks like when one loses his sobriety, it doesn't really offer a clear picture of what it looks like when one has it. And then this line jumped out at me on page 55 of the Green Book. In recovery, I'm learning that although I may not have a choice about feeling these feelings, I have a choice about whether to act on them or not. I'm going to repeat that. In recovery, I'm learning that although I may not have a choice about feeling these feelings, I have a choice about whether to act on them or not. So emotional sobriety is not about eradicating, ignoring, controlling, or suppressing our emotions. It's about controlling the actions we take in response to our emotions. Thus, the quality of our sobriety is equal to the quality of our actions. And from there, I developed what I now have as a definition for emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety isn't about controlling your emotions. It's about not letting them control you.
And before our program, I did not have emotional sobriety. I didn't control my actions or reactions to my emotions in an appropriate way. Especially living in addiction with undiagnosed bipolar 2, there were times where in mania, feeling those good emotions of happiness and euphoria, that I would react by making unhealthy decisions because I didn't want that high to end. And there are also times that in a depressive state, while experiencing feelings of sadness, anger, or loneliness, I would make poor decisions, and those also led to acting out. Our reactions to our emotions is something we have to learn to control. And for me, that means I need to make a choice. I can either call someone, take a walk, pray, maybe even have a good cry, but ultimately accepting my feelings and responding to them in a healthy manner instead of allowing my emotions to control me is what helps me avoid possible relapse.
And the last thing I'd like to touch on before we wrap this up, your program of recovery is perfectly designed to give you exactly the results that you're getting. For newcomers, it can be difficult to know what to expect when you enter recovery, what to do, what not to do, which of our behaviors are self-defeating, how long it will take to recover, and how you'll know when that happens. No one's telling you what you should be doing, and maybe you haven't bothered to ask. Try to attend a meeting a week, but everything is hectic and unpredictable at home still. You haven't got to know anyone because you're never in the same meeting twice. You haven't talked to anyone outside of a meeting, so you haven't connected with anyone else's story. You haven't shared anything about your own. You haven't bonded with anybody over a shared experience or felt the comfort that comes from knowing that you aren't alone. Or maybe you've been in a few months and it doesn't seem like anything has really changed. There's good news. In either case, it's not your fault. You're not doing anything wrong. There is no right way or wrong way to do recovery. But that said, what you're getting out of recovery is exactly what you should be getting out of recovery based on what you're putting into it. I'm the kind of guy that will, if I get a nasty cut, I'll maybe just duct tape it up or, close it up with some super glue and let time do the rest. And that's one way to heal a wound. Another way is to keep it clean, to bandage it, to change it, to apply medicine periodically. And either way, the wound will heal. But by cleaning and changing the bandage, applying medicine, the scarring will be far less prevalent. It's the same thing with recovery. Time alone will heal our wounds to a degree, but we'll be better off in the long run with far less scarring if we work a rigorous program. Do what you did and you'll get what you got. But if you want something different, do something different, because nothing changes if nothing changes.
And we've changed so much in our lives through recovery, and life is really good. Just sharing how we feel with each other, getting to know one another on a different, more intimate level has been and continues to be really amazing. And I'm loving getting to know my husband and myself in recovery with sober eyes. And because of my higher power in this program, I have everything I ever wanted.
In the first 16 years of my marriage, I could never have confidently said that my wife was happy. But now in our 18th year, I can say without reservation that both her and I are precisely that. The life we're living now is exactly the life that I asked God for all those years ago when we married. A sexaholic and her co-addict living in holy matrimony. Up until about 2 years ago, my problem was that I was too ashamed to breathe a word of it to anyone. My problem now is that I want to tell everyone. This is the good life, y'all. Thanks for letting us share.
Wow, thank you so much, Matt and Carriss. Beautiful share, powerful share. To those in the live audience, if you would like to ask Matt or Carriss a question, please type it in the chat. If you want to remain anonymous and not have me read your first name when you send those questions in, just let me know or send it direct message to me, and then I'll keep it anonymous. Otherwise, I'll read your first name when we get to there. I've written a lot of questions, and I'm excited to hear more questions here. And actually, we'll go to one of our live audience members here, and we'll start off with that. This is from Verity. Verity asks, what qualities do you admire in each other? And then the second question on that, do you have any non-negotiables in your relationship and are you aware of them?
I'll start with that. The quality that I most admire in Carriss now, not one that she possessed before, and that is rigorous honesty. I could never have been sure that she was telling me the truth now or then. Now I can take it to the bank. She is one of the most honest people that I know.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's been your vulnerability, you being more open, sharing how you feel, talking about your day. That's probably my favorite trait.
And what was the second part of that question? Non-negotiables?
Yeah, the second part was, do you have any non-negotiables in your relationship, and are you aware of them?
That's a great question for Matt.
Non-negotiables. Non-negotiable. Yeah, halts. We don't try to communicate about important things. And this is probably the most important thing in our recovery is recognizing when we're in halts. You're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, stressed, man. It's going to come out funny. It's going to come out and in the wrong way, a mean way. It's just, we don't try that kind of communication when we're there. It's not the time. We can come back to it. That problem will still be there, whatever it is later. We don't have to go into it at the time.
Yeah, there is a hard, like, no, we're not doing this. And it doesn't have to be both of us feeling anything. It can be one of us and say that this is just not the time. Like, that is definitely a non-negotiable. If I'm too tired to have a serious conversation that he really, really wants to have, that's too bad. It's not a need that I can meet at that moment. And we respect that boundary for each other.
Yeah, and boundaries are a good way to talk about non-negotiables. And boundaries aren't restrictions that I place on someone else, but restrictions that I place on my own behavior. And for me, the biggest one is I don't go through her things. She calls me an all-star snooper, you know. I went through her phone any chance that I got. And I remember the day that I first really tried to not do it. We were at a friend's house for New Year's Eve. She fell asleep on the couch. And I had made the decision prior to that to not go through her things. But as soon as I saw she fell asleep, my hand went for her phone, you know, instinctively. And I had to physically stop myself from doing that. It had become a physical addiction of mine. So that's another non-negotiable, and I call that a boundary.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, you know, sometimes when my wife and I are in a discussion that is very important to one of us and the other person is hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed. And for example, I may say, you know what, I'm really tired right now. Can we readdress this? Well, I'm going to actually reverse that because it's usually her that says, you know what, I'm really tired, but can we do this another time? And I'm like, no, this is vital. How do you respect that boundary, I guess, and step back rather than saying, no, this is like a 10 on my importance scale. I need to do this now.
For me, if I'm the one who wants to have the conversation and he's not willing to have it at that moment, then I'm like, okay, when is a good time, or when do you think is going to be a good time? And we typically come up with, okay, let's talk tomorrow, maybe around 1:00, and try to stick to that. And, you know, that schedule might change during the day, the next morning or whatever, but we try to come up with a time so that we can both be ready for that conversation.
Yeah, if it's a 10 level importance for either one of us, it's going to be a 10 level importance when we agree to come back to it. You know, it may just be, got to have something to eat first. Let me grab a sandwich. I need a 30-minute nap, power nap, and then we can talk. I put her through such hell with my interrogations late at night, you know, a bottle of Jameson in me, something like that. When she says, now is not the time, I don't go there. Now is not the time. That will be there tomorrow or later.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love those perspectives. Next question comes from Samantha. Samantha says, how do you support each other in working through emotional challenges while still maintaining your own personal recovery?
I'll start there. The control freak in me wanted to run her program, and I realized through experience, this is anecdotal evidence, that by staying out of her business, working on myself, she naturally wanted to share the emotions with me that I had stifled in her, that everybody in her life had stifled with her since childhood. It was difficult when I started learning how to be vulnerable, that she wasn't quite there with me. And I wanted to kind of coach that out of her, but I realized I'm not her damn sponsor. You know, that's not my business. I can tell her that I would like to have these conversations, but I do it when she's ready to. And she now works the other program as well, has a wonderful sponsor. So awesome to see. And this guy's got 20 years in another Anon program and a few in S-Anon. He's so awesome that we call him Yodanon. Okay. And he's a wonderful sponsor. And because he's been working with her, she's able to share these things. And I just wait till she's ready.
I don't think I have anything to add, actually.
No, that's great. And I want to give a personal experience. About 6 months ago, I went to my wife with, you know, something. I was like, hey, I need to talk to you about this. What are your thoughts? And I love what she said. She says, I'm not your sponsor. I'm not your higher power. Go talk to your sponsor and your higher power. I'm not going to make that decision for you. And that was something that at first made me pretty cranky. And then I went, wait, that is probably the most healthy thing that she could ever say at this time, where I'm not making her my higher power and her my
Sure.
sponsor. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Justin, one more thing about that. I don't know what it's like to be a normal person. She doesn't know what it's like to be a normal person. Maybe normal people can talk like that to each other, but that's dangerous for addicts and co-addicts. That's why we don't do it. We can't afford to meddle in their affairs because it just goes south every time. That's why it's, there's the boundary there. This is for you and your sponsor. I can't get involved in that.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question comes from Christian. Christian says, how do you apply think and hard in the relationship with yourself and not with others?
Ooh.
Oh, good question.
Christian's a thinker, isn't he?
Yeah. I think for myself, it's really, I've learned to have more positive self-talk. And so I do think about the things that I say to myself, that internal voice that I have. I want those things to be honest and kind and necessary, and have that build up my own motivation and give myself emotional support as much as I can, because I did not used to think very highly of myself, very low self-esteem. And through this program, I've learned to have a new sense of confidence. And that also came through positive self-talk and the solution to this problem, and understanding that I had a problem to begin with. And so all of those things have changed the way that I think of myself and talk to myself. And in turn, it's changed the way I think about others and talk to them as well.
That was so beautiful. I will just leave it at that.
Yeah, that was very, very clearly said. Thank you for sharing that, Carriss. All right, next question is from an anonymous attendee here. This person says, how do you deal with loneliness in marriage, and what prevents fantasy thinking when you are in that lonely place?
Well, I guess I'll take that one. There's still going to be loneliness sometimes, at least for me. And when I'm feeling that way and fantasy wants to creep in, I tend to surrender it, and sometimes several times, because it doesn't always just immediately go away. I change my location in the house. I go to another room. I do something else. I try to make a phone call or a journal. I just use whatever tools pop into mind at the time to help mitigate that problem.
I can have bouts of workaholism in all the wrong ways. I get obsessed with a project, a hobby, an interest, whatever. But also this can happen with recovery stuff. I'll take on a project and take so long getting through it that I'm making her lonely. I'm not paying her any attention. And she's been really good about, not in the past, she was terrible about this. But now she, if I'm in the basement on the computer and I'm down there too long, she'll come and tell me, hey, I'm feeling lonely. I need some attention. And now that she's in school, she's working on a master's degree now. Tables have turned a little bit. She's doing homework. She's doing schoolwork all the time. And she's got to get it done, and I get that. And every once in a while, I got to tell her that I'm lonely. But more often than not, she's good enough where I can just sneak into her office with her, have a chat for a few minutes, whatever. I can pull her away for 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm pretty good after that.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Oh, go ahead, Carriss. Anything else?
Oh, no, I was saying I'm glad he added that, because I was going to add that as well. So, yeah.
No, that's great. Excellent. Thank you so much. I want to pause here and ask a question that I was going to ask at the very beginning, but I'd like to do that now. Can you define, for those of us who may not be, maybe substance addicts, whether it be alcohol or drugs, or, something that is tangible in that sense, what sexaholism and how that qualifies as an addiction in your own life, how you identify it as an addiction in your own life?
So for me, it's just the compulsory behavior, the obsession, the progressive nature, and, something that I could not stop on my own, that I was powerless to stop that behavior. And so that for me was realizing all of those things is how I realized it's a disease. It's an addiction. Because there are plenty other things, habits and hobbies and whatever that I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. So I just stop. I couldn't stop this.
And for me, I'm not a sexaholic, but I'm an everything else-aholic, drugs and alcohol especially. And it's a matter of continuing to do something that you have no interest in doing anymore, and what brings you there in the first place, at least in my case, was this fantasy, right? I didn't like my reality. So I created this fantasy and tried to live in that fantasy. And drugs and alcohol got me there, but there was a mental game that I played with myself where I tricked myself into thinking that these things were actually putting me into that fantasy. And to that I will add, dishonesty is also, that is the first clue that you're losing emotional sobriety. When we're dishonest with somebody, it's because we fear the consequences of a particular thing or action or circumstance. And so we create a lie, and that's a fantasy. And we try to live in that lie and pull someone else into that with us. So for me, it's a matter of not accepting the reality of a situation. It's a matter of fantasy more than anything. The drugs and alcohol are secondary. It's the fantasy that I live in. And the drug and the alcohol kind of help me get there.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you for helping define that. Next question comes from an anonymous attendee here. This person says, my wife is an addict and I am an S-Anon. She and I are currently separated. Have you separated before, and what was that like?
You want to take that?
We separated a couple of times, but for very short periods of time, because I was so codependent, I couldn't handle it. And it was a more of a control thing anyway. I thought I would scare her into doing the right thing or behaving a particular way. And one night away from home, and I just couldn't take it anymore, and I had to go back. So that night at a time here and there.
Yeah, maybe 3 days was the longest.
Yeah, but she was hard-headed enough that she wasn't going to give me what I wanted. She wasn't going to tell me that she missed me, or that she was sad, or that she was willing to work on it. The worst of our worst, we stuck through it. We didn't separate. We didn't have in-house separations or out-of-house separations. But we did kind of have contracts that we formalized in one way or another. I'll say this. The last discovery that I had was a particularly bad one. And I went to the bank and took 10 grand out, and that was my get out of Dodge fund. And I told her that I'd done that. And shortly after that, we just made a decision to not jump ship for 1 year. We were going to strike divorce from our vocabulary for the period of 1 year. We wouldn't have a conversation like that. We would work on ourselves. We would go to RCA or something like that as a couple and revisit the idea in 12 months. And how many years has it been since then? 2?
It's been 2 this past August.
Yeah, this past August, we celebrated 2 years since that contract. We've not had to revisit that idea again.
And RCA is Recovering Couples Anonymous.
Yeah, are you active in RCA? Are you able to share that or willing to share that?
We're willing to. We don't go so much anymore, but it was, after I think first week of December 2021, I went to my first S-Anon meeting, and then maybe the next week, my first RCA meeting. And that was really good. RCA helped me to recover with her, helped me to learn to stay in my lane, right? Because I always went through her stuff because I wanted to know what was going on with her, because she wasn't telling me, right? And I thought it was okay that I was reading her recovery journals and all this ridiculous stuff. And it wasn't. So when I started S-Anon and RCA, I was able to recover with her. I kind of knew what was going on. I learned to stay in my lane. And I also wasn't willing to just blast her out there with everybody. So I was able to keep my composure, recovering with her. So we did get to do something together, and we had our own thing, and that helped tremendously.
Yeah, it was really helpful for me because it also allowed me to hear other stories similar to ours. And hearing that was like very eye-opening, because I got a better understanding of what Matt was going through by hearing other men in the program that were going through the same thing, and women as well. But for some reason, the particular RCA group we go to is mostly women sex addicts and men S-Anon members, which is a very interesting dynamic. But it is for all recovery, all addictions. So it doesn't matter if it's SA, S-Anon, substance abuse. It doesn't matter what it is. But yeah, it's a great program.
And I'll say this about that as well. Going and seeing other couples going through it was hugely important to me, more so than seeing men in S-Anon, because I could see these guys are trying to work it out. I had in my mind, there's a lot of pride that comes with a man whose wife is a sexaholic. What man would stick through this when his wife is doing this? What kind of man is that person? I had that in my head. But seeing these men that are S-Anons in recovery, in the same program as their wife, and they're working on it, that helped me tremendously get rid of the fear and the pride and all of that was blocking me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. All right, next question comes from Ryan from our live audience. Ryan says, can each of you share what it looked like for you to come to a place of trust in each other and to have each other's best interests in mind?
We'll start that. Okay. Yeah. Trust was hard for me, right? Because she violated our marital vows over and over and over again and lied about it. And, you hear a lot of people say that the lying about it was the worst. And that was true for me. I just wanted honesty. I just wanted to know that I wasn't insane. I just wanted her to cop to it so that we could move beyond it. But it was like 10, 12 years of trickle truth disclosures. So it was very hard to trust her at first. And then at some point I realized that I didn't need to trust her because I trust her program. She works a wonderful program. If there was something that came up that was weird, there would be red flags. I would see that. And then we could have a healthy communication about it. I don't need to trust her because I trust her program. I don't need to even trust her program because I trust God. God is at the center of all of this, not just our coupleship, but these 12 steps. So the trust thing became a non-issue at some point. I don't need to worry about trusting her. And then once I had that, it just became easy to trust her because she now is a trustworthy person.
I think you said all the things I want to say.
Sorry.
No, that was beautiful. And I love how you took that from trusting the individual to trusting the program to trusting God that all these things will work out. That was an eye-opener for me. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
All right. From one of our live audience members, what does HARD stand for again?
Honest, appropriate, respectful, and direct. So it's
all
honest,
right.
respectful, direct.
So talk to us one more time about the importance of honest, appropriate, respectful, and direct in your conversations. So
particularly for me, I can't remember where I heard this or who told this to me, but, when they described that this is how communication should be, and I started program and started developing that honesty within myself and outwardly with others, that became really important for me. I want to be honest and appropriate in all situations and respectful to others. And the direct for me is, really be mindful of what you're saying, be direct, mean what you say. I want to be clear in my communication. I want to say what I mean. And so that has made me really work on how I say what I say so that it can actually be understood by the other party rather than, hey, I think I want something over here, or it'd be nice if I'm just direct. Hey, can you meet this need for me? Whatever it may be, rather than beating around the bush. I'm just direct and honest.
Yeah, I don't use that particular acronym, but think it's important to me because I thought if it was just true, it was okay to say whatever. It didn't matter how I said it either. But, I told you about my buddy Yodanon. He says that the truth is a gun with real bullets that hurt and kill people. And that's how I use truth as a weapon. So it can't just be true. It has to be helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind as well, or I can't go there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Next question I have. One of the things you mentioned, I think it was Carriss who mentioned this, that, being able to express desirability of the partner and those types of things is one of the things that heals that intimacy. For me, this is kind of tricky because in my addiction, objectification is a massive part of my addiction, and objectifying somebody by the way they look or whatever. And if I were to say, "Hey, honey, you're looking really good today. You're desirable today," that might be a trigger to them. How would one go about approaching that in a healthy manner?
That's a difficult question for me. I think because I haven't had a lot of trouble with objectification, I think just expressing that in a healthy manner goes back to heart and to think. Being very specific, and addressing that person in a respectful manner.
Yeah, thank you. All right. And Matt, early on in this, you talked about how you had like 20 pages, an ultimatum. This is what, Carriss, you have to abide by word for this, not realizing that the lumber you were trying to build this house with was rotted out lumber of your own. Talk to us about the importance of turning the microscope away from the other person and putting that magnifying mirror on yourself in recovery.
I don't think there's any other way to do it. Recovery, in fact, there's not. It's just that is it. You solve the problem. You have to recognize the problem is you. Period. When you're in a coupleship, sure, you want to heal that coupleship, but it's just not going to work if one of the people in the coupleship is sick. You have to get well yourself. And well, I guess I understood that, what is the word I'm looking for? Yeah, sure. I guess I understood that, but without the experience of it, and I read it in a book, I believed that to be the case, but I had no experience to suggest that that is actually true. It carried no weight for me. But I did make a decision. It had to be a decision. Now, I don't know where I got that from, that strength to make the decision to do it differently. I can only imagine God gave that to me. But I made the decision to work on myself. And you know what that was, Justin? I'll tell you what that was. When that came, I was 9 months into my program and I had done nothing except for try to work her program. I didn't go to meetings. I didn't call my sponsor. I didn't do anything. And he made a move that was uncharacteristic of him. And that was to send me a text. And that text said, if it were me, here's what a good program of recovery would look like. And he just mentioned all the things that a normal person in recovery does. And it's just something about that. He did that. He would not have done it because that's too controlling for him. He has to be very careful. And he did that anyway. And I thought, I'm not doing any of this. And for him to send me that message, it blew my mind. And I just made the decision, I'm going to get to work. And then I start to work. People were asking me to share my story in meetings. There's just no way to do it otherwise. I couldn't imagine. My sister sent me a birthday card and said that she was so proud of it, what kind of a person I am now. And she had no idea what I was doing, but that it was working. And my son asked me about recovery, He calls our house a house of recovery, Justin. And it started with looking at myself.
Miracles. Love it.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Love
sir.
it. Thank you for sharing this healing and inspiring story that brings hope to many people who may think, my marriage, my relationships, my life is broken to a point of no return. And thank you for sharing that hope. Are there any other words of wisdom that either or both of you have before we close this meeting out?
Just be good to each other.
Stay the course.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matt and Carriss, for a fantastic RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting. If we missed your question in the live audience, or if you have more, consider joining our WhatsApp community. You can email me at rico12pod@gmail.com to join in that conversation. I'll get you in the WhatsApp group. Also, if you'd like to get in contact with Matt or Carriss, you can email me and I can help facilitate that. Rico12pod@gmail.com. If you haven't already done so, please consider rating and reviewing Rico 12 in Apple Podcasts. It really is a helpful way to get the message out to more people who may need to hear this type of message of hope. Next Friday, we're going to hear from another first-time Rico 12 speaker, Kathy C., whose topic will be the crux of the problem. What am I thinking? And I look forward to hearing from her. Stay tuned in the WhatsApp community and on our email list to get more information on that. All right, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the thank you prayer that Matt and Carriss will say for us.
This prayer was passed on to my sponsor by the late Dave T., who was a giant in both SA, S-Anon, as well as AA. And he passed this on to my sponsor, who passed it on to me. It's very simple. It goes like this. Dear God, thank you, thank you, thank you. Amen.
Amen. And thank you. Remember, everybody, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
I've seen stars fall from above. I've fallen in and out of love. I've been high and I've been low. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. I've seen a boy become a man. He got lost without a plan. He's so far away from home. Now I know I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. I'm looking for the words to say. You make the world a better place, and I can call that place my home. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. Your arms surrounding me. Your touch is grounding me. No longer searching for purpose all alone. 'Cause now I know that I just can't do this on my own. So let me see just what you need to set you free, so we can be. I saw stars fall from above. I fell in and out of love. I got high and I fell low. But now I know that I just can't do this on my own. No, I just can't do this on my own. I just can't do this on my own.